So we've been talking about DirectX 12 for a long time on this channel. We were talking about it before it was actually officially revealed. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about what we know thus far, give you some new statements from a developer who's currently working on DX12, and kind of give you a recap for those maybe who aren't aware of what's going on. DX12 going to be released next year along with Windows 10. In early January, we are getting a Windows 10 presentation. We may find out more about that then. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But first off, for those of you who are unaware, DX12 is a new API coming from Microsoft. API, basically tools that developers use to build games. And it's going to be hitting PC and the Xbox One. Now, I usually see some people down in the comment section saying, well, eventually it'll come to PS4. No, it's not going to come to PS4. PS4 uses their own API, and that does not mean that theirs can't be updated as well. So everybody's API can be updated. This is just Microsoft's that we're talking about though. So DX12 is supposed to bring PCs closer to the metal, which is a phrase that is used when developing consoles because consoles are supposed to be closer to the metal. So because the PCs are going to be brought in line closer to what the consoles are, that means that they are going to see a greater benefit from DX12. Now, there have been some rumors that only Windows 8 and Windows 10 is going to support DX12, but those have not been confirmed. Someone from, I believe, AMD came out a few weeks ago and said DX12 wasn't coming to Windows 7, but they later went back and retracted those statements. Now, they could have retracted them because they were just simply guessing or assuming, or maybe they spoke too early and Microsoft's NDA made them retract those statements. Honestly, we don't know, but we do know that it is going to be releasing with Windows 10 at least. Now, there's a lot of people trying to downplay DirectX 12 and pretending that it's not going to do much for gaming. They say that this is just Microsoft's PR department hyping this product up and spouting a bunch of nonsense. So let me recap a few statements that have been made and try to keep in mind none of these statements come from Microsoft, all right? So AMD said, and it's not just a small benefit, it's like getting 4 generations of hardware ahead with this API. Intel said this is absolutely, I think, the most significant jump in technology in a long time. NVIDIA, existing cards will see orders of magnitude improvements from DirectX 12's release, going from hundreds of thousands to millions and maybe tens of millions of system draws a second. So how is this? This is a question on a lot of people's mind. Not everybody, because some people get it, but not everybody does. A lot of people don't understand how you can get more performance out of older hardware. But if you're a PC gamer, you understand how software updates work. They're called drivers, and graphic card creators put out new drivers constantly, sometimes with new games. As soon as they come out, they'll put out new drivers for that game. And what that does is it's a software update for your hardware that allows it to perform better without actually having to go buy new hardware. So why else do you think you see people bitching and flipping out whenever they buy a new game and it comes out on the PC and it runs like crap on a $1,500 GPU? It doesn't matter how big or strong or how expensive the GPU was, there are still some games that come out today that run like shit on those GPUs. And my point is that it doesn't matter how big your GPU is or how strong it is, if the game or the code isn't optimized right, the game is going to run like shit, period. So how does DX12 really benefit older hardware? You know, one of the biggest differences that DX12 has over DX11 is the ability for your CPU to take advantage of the multiple cores that it has. So you may have a computer that has, for instance, 8 cores. Which, by the way, is the same as what's in the Xbox and the PS4. But currently with video games, 1 core does most of the work in DirectX 11. With DirectX 12, they have figured out how to offload the work and spread it out so that all cores can be used. which drastically cuts down the amount of time for a frame to be rendered or drastically optimizes that frame depending on how you want to say it. So, for instance, here is a slide showing a frame being rendered on DX11, and you can see that on thread 0, it's performing most of the work. And that frame, even though they have all those cores, it still took 9 milliseconds to render because one core is doing most of the work. And if you want to see the comparison between DX11 and DX12 in real time, I'll leave a link down in the description box so you can actually watch a video to see like where this picture came from or where this graph came from. Now, let's move on to a frame rendered in DX12. You can see that the load is now spread out, and that same frame which was rendered in 9 milliseconds is now rendered in 4 milliseconds. So they didn't change anything with the hardware, it was the software that was changed, and they optimized the efficiency of the hardware. So the good news is, one good thing about DX12 is we should see higher frames per second. So let's look at a quote from Brad Wardell. He's a current developer working on DX12, and he just posted this up on his blog this week, which I'll leave a link to in the description box. He says, how much real-world improvement you get depends heavily on both the developer and the game, but the reason we're all so excited is that DirectX 12 should be the biggest performance bump for those who utilize it we've ever seen. What this means to you: next time you watch Jurassic Park or Phantom Menace, please realize that the CGI in those movies can be done in real time today. However, most graphic engines in games still render scenes very differently than in movies. That's because it's only recently been possible to create real-world fidelity in real time. But a modern machine with DirectX 12 could do real-time visuals in a game that is as good as you would get, say, in Lord of the Rings. We will need to get away from frame rate as being the key metric on its own unless we're comparing apples to apples. The DirectX 12 Mantle-specific games will look unmistakably different than the ones we have today. So what he's saying is games that are built from the ground up to use this technology is going to look different. What we basically do today in games is render a frame and then apply a bunch of post-process effects to it. In a DirectX 12 world, we'll render images the same way they did CGI in the past. With a modern CPU plus GPU combo with DirectX 12, you could do parts of Battle of the Helm's Deep from Lord of the Rings in real time. Keep a very close eye on Unreal, Frostbite, Crytek. So, the last time I quoted Brad, there were a group of people who tried to throw him under the bus because he said, quote, "It effectively gives Xbox One owners a new GPU that is twice as fast as the old one." And they claimed that this guy was a joke because of that statement. But the joke is really on the people who had a hard time in reading comprehension class during school. He never said that you're getting a new GPU. You cannot change the GPU inside the Xbox One, but what you can do is optimize it. And we're talking about increasing the efficiency of the hardware. And he went through and clarified this by saying, quote, it is still basically a single core stack. With DirectX 12, all 8 cores will be able to split the work. If my game can have multiple threads talk to the GPU and gets jobs going in parallel, my game is faster. So if you're using more cores for the CPU to talk to the GPU, then you are increasing the speed of it. You're not changing the hardware, but you're allowing the hardware to actually perform and work better and faster. It's really not that difficult to understand, but you do have to be willing to clean out your ears to hear what is being said in order to actually understand it. Now, most of the benefits, as I have stated, are going to be coming to the PC. But what about the Xbox One? The API is already close to the metal. But how does the CPU stack work? This developer was asked about it, whether or not we would see improvements on the Xbox One. and he said, quote, "Only time will tell, but I think so. The main issue is that even on Xbox One, only one core gets used for most of the pre-processing." So if one core is being used for most of the pre-processing, just like that chart that I showed you earlier on the PC, and it's going to allow more cores to spread that work, then you would think that there would be a little bit of benefit. So next year when DX12 is released, are we going to see a massive jump simply because there's a new API out? No. But what he did say was that developers who want to optimize, who want to build their games from the ground up using DirectX 12, could see a big jump. But Dragon, didn't Phil Spencer himself say that DirectX 12 wouldn't do anything for Xbox One? No. Never once did he say that DirectX 12 wouldn't bring benefits to the Xbox One. But somehow this quote keeps on getting repeated and repeated like talking parrots. Here's what he said. "I'm not trying to rain on anybody's parade, but the CPU, GPU memory that's in the Xbox One doesn't change when you go to DirectX 12. DirectX 12 makes it easier to do what the Xbox One is good at, which will be nice. You'll see improvements in games with the use of DirectX 12. Oh, you mean DX12 isn't going to change the CPU and GPU inside the Xbox? No. No one has ever made that argument that I'm aware of. But it's a non-argument statement that keeps on getting brought up by people trying to downplay any sort of benefits that might be seen through DirectX 12. But at the same time, don't go expecting to see avatar graphics showing up anytime soon. As I've said from the very beginning, if you look at games on the PS3 and the 360 at launch and compare them to games that are releasing now on those platforms, they have come a long way. And no doubt the same thing is going to happen with PS4 and Xbox One. And the new APIs like DX12 is only going to help that. So don't go out there expecting the world. Don't go out there expecting this to be the best thing since sliced bread. But also, don't go out there thinking that this isn't going to make any sort of difference whatsoever, because you've got way too many people who actually are in the know and who work in this field who are saying otherwise. And they're not paid spokesmen by Microsoft. And one more point that I've said before repeatedly that I think is a pretty big game changer whenever it comes to DirectX 12 and Windows 10 isn't necessarily the graphics on screen, even though I do hope that we will at least see better frames per second, but the ability for developers to easily port games from the PC to the Xbox One. We're talking mere days, not months, not years to do ports. They're talking about doing it in 2 or 3 days now with this new setup. And vice versa, being able to port Xbox One games to the PC. And hopefully we learn more about this in January. I think the last week of January or somewhere close to there, they are going to be doing a big Windows 10 event. And Phil Spencer is listed as one of the presenters for the show. And he stated that it's time to talk about PC gaming. So hopefully we also find out a little bit more about a new dashboard that's been rumored that will also be revealed in that event. So if you want to read these statements from the DirectX 12 developer, links down in the description box as always. Post below, let me know what are your thoughts on DX12 and do you think it'll make any sort of impact on gaming. That does it for me, the Red Dragon. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.